Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Donna Seymour. I'm a member of the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women, one of the civic partners for this show. Today we're hosting a conversation with Sue Dragan about the Stephen Care Ministries. Now, I have to tell you that in the interest of full disclosure, Sue is my sister and she lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which makes her the first relative that we've interviewed for the show and our most long-distance guest. So, Sue, we're really happy to have you here. You're visiting for a few days, yes, so that's why we snagged you, although we had talked about doing this last fall and just couldn't make it work. Today we're going to be talking about caregiving, and in particular how it is offered and managed through the Stephen Ministry Caregivers Program. So let's start out by giving folks an opportunity to find out a little bit about you. You haven't lived here in about 40 years, so we'll do a little thumbnail sketch of your life since you left the North Country. You trained professionally as a nurse in college.
I did.
After that?
Very short. Well, I worked about a year in Messina, New York at the hospital, and not very long after that went to Houston, Texas, and worked in the Houston Medical Center there. And probably about 13, 14 years, met my husband, got married, and he went to school, which was also in healthcare. And we decided when that was over that we'd been married about 5 years and it was time to go someplace smaller, think about raising a family. And Albuquerque, New Mexico, we'd both been there as a visiting, and we loved it, and so we decided to settle there. We joined a church, we started raising our family. Our family and a few other families at the church decided to start a day school up through 8th grade. That was accomplished, and that was the beginning of me being invested in actually no longer nursing but still caring, still giving care. I volunteered for the school, I volunteered with parents, I volunteered with the Parent-Teacher League, and I helped in classrooms, I did copying, and that was basically where I stayed. My kids went on college, post-grad. I still am grade school and work there. Our church is associated with this grade school, and our pastor has always been very invested in caregiving and nurturing not only the church families but the school families. And one of our parishioners, who happened to be a lay leader, was a chaperone one day up in Fort Collins, Colorado on a youth trip, and he went into the men's room and needed to use the facilities, and he looked up, and there on the door was a Stephen Ministries advertisement or announcement that said, if you have troubles, if you have whatever, and it piqued his interest. So he brought that information back to our pastor, and that was only about a year ago. It's amazing to me that, so this was, I'm a caregiver at heart, I'm a nurse, I will always be that, and this sounded like a really great place for me to continue to invest my gifts, my talents, and serve our church and our school even more. So that's kind of where I've been.
Caregiving not only makes our life possible, it plays a critical role in determining the quality of our lives. We start out needing our every need met as babies, and so that babies are the first recipients of caregiving in their life, and as we grow, we begin to assume more and more of our own caregiving as we mature, but at various points along the way we're going to need all kinds of help. It may be medical help, it may be other kinds of help, and we can be caregivers at the same time as we are needing cares. And one of the things that we know is if we live long enough, we go to the other end of the caregiving spectrum, which is that we start to need care again as we age and we're no longer able to meet our own needs
which is another reason I'm here.
Yeah, exactly. So in addition to the informal care that we can give and receive through our families and our churches and our community organizations, there's professional and healthcare institutions and other kinds of things. When you first were here last year for several months, you started to tell me about the Stephen's Ministry Care, and I got quite intrigued by that because I hadn't heard of it before. So let's talk a little bit about what it is, how the word minister is used in this particular setting, and give us a snapshot of the Stephen's program.
Basically, in this context, ministry is one-on-one, trained layperson attendance, listening and caring. In effect, it's as simple as that. Show up and be there for someone. So the way that that also helps us support our pastor. Our pastor is, every pastor that has ever come down the pike knows that there's a lot more need than there is pastor to go around. And so this program augments pastoral care as well. And in general, the Stephen program amounts to training people, giving them a really good foundation in how to listen, how to communicate, create boundaries, be healthy in their relationship. It's not really an evangelism kind of thing, but clearly because it's Christian caregiving, you, without question, expose someone who maybe hasn't been involved in any Christian environment. You might end up being able to explain a little bit about that, but it's truly not an evangelism program as much as it is simple caregiving. Something that's sorely lacking in a lot of people's lives, which is pretty tragic, I think.
Yeah. So the program was started by a man named Stephen Hawke. Tell us a little bit about him and what his idea was.
Stephen Hawke in 1975 was both a pastor and a psychologist. And in his dealings, in his business as well as his pastor position, he recognized there wasn't enough availability of himself to go around. So he decided in 1975 to just train a handful of people so that they were well equipped to be caregivers. And that's what we call ourselves, caregivers. And that went on for a little while, and the caregivers were so excited, they said, Pastor, you have to do this. You have to spread this around. You can't just keep this little nugget. So he started, over the next year or two, he started going to neighboring churches and teaching those parishioners, those that wanted to volunteer and had some gifts in caregiving. Well, that was such an incredible success that it took up so much of his time. He was not able to serve his profession well. He wasn't able to serve even as pastor as well as he wanted to. So at that point, he decided in 1978 to make this a nonprofit organization and train caregivers that anywhere around the country that wanted to be trained. And that's actually something he did privately and on his own for a long time. So in effect, the name Stephen Ministry comes from Acts, 6th chapter in Acts, where the apostles actually asked Stephen to be a caregiver. He kind of put him in charge of caregiving, and that's how it came about. Non-denominational, actually kind of multi-servicing. It is and not for profit.
Tell us a little bit, Sue, about how many Stephen Ministry organizations there are worldwide and how they're spread out.
This is kind of amazing to me when I first learned this. So there are over 12,000 institutions or groups worldwide that do this. Every state in this United States has Stephen Ministry congregations or groups. The 10 provinces in Canada also do, and 29 other countries around the world. So this is far-reaching. In the 40 years it's bloomed, let's say. There are about 177 denominations, and also there are some groups that are non-denominational that don't really even fall under a Christian heading that are also trained to be caregivers as well. Churches, long-term care, short-term care, community mission groups, or people that go into areas that have earthquakes or disaster areas. Right. They have some caregivers that go in. And interestingly, I hadn't shared this with you, is that there are some early on, not long, they haven't been around long, colleges are actually opening up the Christian ministry, Stephen's ministry for them as well. So in New York State, there are actually 306, I think it is, 304, I'm sorry, congregations that are available, one here locally, which was news to us. In New Mexico, there's 51. And until last year, it was 50 because our congregation is the 51. Yes, we're the extra. 72,000 lay leaders and pastors have been brought into this program, and the number of Stephen ministers that these lay leaders have trained is over 600,000 worldwide, and the number of individuals that we call care receivers is well over well, millions, because this is an ongoing process, and you can have, you can be in this program for years and years and continue to give care.
So talk to us through a little bit about how the program works, how it's structured, how the training is accomplished, what the time commitment is, if someone is interested in following up more on this program.
So it's an incredibly structured program. They have basically, if you were a teacher and you have a lesson plan for a week, this is the lesson plan for 50 hours of training. So they're so organized that what you first do is you apply for the relationship with the Stephen Ministry, whoever your group is. Doesn't have to be that structured, but you have to get a relationship. That's a lifelong relationship with StephenMinistries.org. Then you send at least one, and preferably a few more, individuals who are caregivers at heart, untrained, to one location. There are about 4 or 5 locations around the country that they give these 50-hour, 1-week-long classes to be a Stephen Leader. A Stephen Leader is trained to implement the program and supervise the program. And there's several jobs in that realm. The Stephen Leaders take a comprehensive, we joke, it's called the 40-pound box, back to your congregation, and that has not only a number of designed steps that you follow called the Stephen series that you follow to implement the program, and that's guided, very, very detailed. Then once we've instituted that, which involves advertising that Stephen Ministry is coming to your church, it involves recruiting people and educating them about what it is, as well as it involves the training. So you have people that have been trained for 50 hours to implement the program. Those people then spend 50 hours training the Stephen ministers. So there's a lot of comprehensive education going into this. And gosh, I think once we get training done, then we have supervision. It is a commitment of 2 years per individual. And that's not so rock hard that if you have a personal tragedy, that you can't, step away from it for a while. But we ask for 2 years for consistency. So each Stephen Leader and each Stephen Minister themselves, who's the caregivers, are 2 years. They develop a one-on-one relationship. We don't make cold calls. We don't, come in and just, are there to talk on the phone as a crisis line. We're not a crisis line. So we develop a relationship, and once a week meet, and you come back to your church every other week. We have organized meetings for supervision, report on how things are going. It's a program that is so designed for success that it's almost foolproof.
And if you aren't having success, it's because you've failed to follow
in the
program.
The Stephen series system is there. It has been around for a long, long time. It's been perfected in effect, and they're always looking for ways to make it better. They ask those of us that are instituting programs to bring the information back to them. As a matter of fact, I will be sending an email to our StephenMinistries.org in St. Louis, which is the home base, telling them about this and including the link in it so that they can use it for further information sharing for others.
Right, good. Talk to us, Sue, about the kinds of care that a Stephen minister would give or can give to a person in need.
Ultimately, our goal is for confidential, one-on-one, empathetic Christian caregiving, which basically describes someone who doesn't have an agenda of their own. They're not there to compete. They're there to listen. They're there to facilitate the other individual processing their emotions, because that's what we need to do, take ownership of them, accept them, process them, so that we don't make bad decisions based on them or we don't get stuck in them. And so that's our job. And sometimes that just takes time, and not very many people have that kind of time. And we do this in an environment that can range from a mom that has a new infant that's overwhelmed, to someone who's been diagnosed to cancer, to grief from loss of a job, loss of a loved one. There's any life event at all can precipitate asking, can I have a caregiver? Can I please have a caregiver?
It really sounds like this program is designed to put the golden rule into everyday use.
That's not a bad reference, is do unto others as you would like to have them do unto you. one of the greatest things I think about Stephen Ministry is I call it starting a ripple. Because if I learn how to give good care and I'm demonstrating that to someone else, there are a lot of people who receive care who then turn around and become caregivers. When their crisis is over, they're so affected by the unconditional acceptance and listening that that's what they want to do also. That changes your relationship with your family members, with your other church members. You end up modeling just by the fact you've grown so much in the process of learning how to be a good listener and a good caregiver. And it's a ripple effect. It just keeps going up and up.
Isn't that always the case, that what we learn about ourselves is not from the good times, but from how we handle the bad times?
Right.
And that if we are growing through those bad times, then we are able to be more understanding of others who are in that same situation down the road.
Right, exactly.
What makes a Stephen minister different from another kind of, for example, a counselor or a caregiver or someone who has had, for example, more professionalized training?
One of our favorite sentences is, A, we don't fix and we don't give advice. That is definitely not what we're there for.
Well, where's the fun in that?
Well, exactly. And we don't call ourselves any kind of counselor. We call ourselves caregivers for care receivers. It keeps that identity very clear. It's also woman to woman and man to man. So there's not a chance of having some inappropriate affection out of a close relationship develop. Now, if you want to stay friends with the woman that you've been caring for a year or two, and this is all closed down and everybody's all happy and you want to stay friends, you can. Mm-hmm. There's no problem with that. But the caregiving relationship does come to an end. It has boundaries. So we have boundaries, and we have to understand that we have to also be able to observe and know where we are at with this individual, or this individual's position needs to be handed off to someone else, handed off maybe to pastor who would be more trained, handed off to possibly a counselor of some kind that we could, whether it's psychology, psychiatry. We're trained, part of our training is to recognize those kinds of things. And the lovely part is that we can still maintain a caregiving relationship if the other professional person who's been added in says that's fine.
Okay.
So sometimes we have to take a break and let them work through something acute. Sometimes we can stay right through it and also be a help through that as well.
You know, and one of the things I want to follow up with you about is when you say there is a structure for the caregiving relationship to come to a good end point.
Yeah.
How does that work? How do you recognize what are the pieces that you need in place so that you know when it's time to let someone go on because they've worked through their issue?
Usually, the individual, the care receiver, kind of knows that as they're approaching it. We're trained also to recognize whether they're sort of stalled, as well as when they're ready to, we call it closing the relationship. And that becomes a process that is whatever time is appropriate for that person. We do not have a limit. Although we ask a 2-year commitment, you could have a 2-year commitment that still needed to go on, and we would even transition to another caregiver. But it's a process where both the care receiver and the caregiver come to some agreements as we're going along that, gee, you're getting to a place where you're feeling pretty comfortable now. Mm-hmm. And what do you see as happening next? What are you interested in seeing next happens that we might talk about? So it's usually the care receiver that ends up bringing that up, going, wow, I'm doing great. I'm so glad that this is, continued. So it's a slow process, but it definitely has an end point. That's our goal. Eventually, is to get them to that place where they
to go out of crisis.
We want them to be
right.
happy. We want them to be happy and comfortable and secure. And I mean, we're always going to be there. It's not like they can't call us back and say,
right,
I'm having a little relapse.
Right.
So.
Right. Obviously, the person who is receiving the care is getting a lot out of the program. But the caregiver is getting a lot too. What are the rewards of being a caregiver in this program?
I tell you, it's hard for me to articulate what it feels like. When I was a nurse and I could provide physical care and some emotional care as well, and you see people in an acute situation get better, that's a good feeling that you've kind of put their pieces back together. But emotions and feelings are so fragile and so difficult, and when you can give someone, ultimately they need permission to feel what they feel, to process it, and then to get stronger and to know that they can then start to deal on their own. It's so rewarding to take someone who's been in such a really uncomfortable, painful place and watch them calmly, slowly grow until they find their own peace and their own strength that they can then go forward. It's an awful thing to be in life situations sometimes. They're unpredictable a lot of times. They're overwhelming when you don't expect them to be overwhelming. And what we've learned, and I've learned before this, but we've learned in training, is that people don't forgive themselves and people don't accept the fact that they have some feelings. They're so ashamed and embarrassed for themselves that they have them. That's not the problem. The problem is how to find a way to accept them and go forward. And when that happens, it's very, very peace-giving to me. I find that just so rewarding that I've been able to help someone walk that walk.
You know, one of the questions that I have for you is, when someone decides that they want to start one of these relationships with a caregiver, is there an age range? Are you too young to need care, or are you too old to need care? How do you meet that range of needs?
That's a really great question. For the most part, we don't have any care receivers or caregivers under the age of 18. Now, you can be a caregiver over the age of 18. Life experience is a lot more helpful when you're learning this whole thing, but now that they're beginning to find some college settings that it works in, and there are some interfaith groups that relate with lots of college students in a non-denominational way but are still Christian based. These are people that could be trained and fulfill these kind of things, and at least offer some assistance in the trauma that happens on college campuses. So usually under the age of 18 is off limits because they're not legal adults. They can't,
right.
We can't take responsibility for them. There is no age range going forward. We have caregivers being trained that are in their 70s right now, and they're very, very excited about putting some of their life experiences and their maturity and their view of what they're learning to work on others. So there's no age range at that end, just at this under the age of 18.
Is there any attempt in this program to sort of match people in terms of age, or could, like, say, a 30-year-old be a caregiver to a 70-year-old and vice versa with no problems?
That certainly could happen. The caregivers are trained to be able to manage relationships with people and their emotions by a standard of knowledge and how to approach it. But we try really hard. There's a position in the Stephen Leader group who are the functioning supervisors and administrators that's called the care referral person. That person interviews someone who's contacted us that would like a caregiver, and we assess their needs, we assess their circumstances, and then we try to get someone who's got some common life experience in there. Of course, when you have 12 people wanting care and you have 4 people able to give it, you of course can't. And this is one-on-one at a time.
It's always
one-on-one at a time, no matter how long the relationship lasts. So sometimes, and that's why we want to grow our ministry too, to provide, because there's a lot of people already that we know that want to have a caregiver. So, but yeah, it is. We tend to try to match them up so that you have a good starting base for your developing relationship.
Some rapport.
Yeah, we want some rapport to start with.
It's always good to have someone who's kind of walked a mile in your shoes.
A little bit.
And who has successfully walked a mile in that situation.
It's confidence building for
Yes.
one. But sometimes someone younger can be very effective on someone who's older and give them a spirit for life, or a recognition that there's more than this end, kind of picture that sometimes they have. So.
Right. So someone is interested in learning more about the Stephen Ministries and how they might get involved in the program to offer it within their congregation or within their community group. How would they get started in investigating that?
Well, if they haven't seen a sign in a bathroom, because that worked really well for our church.
As long as you happen to send somebody to Colorado Springs.
Exactly. Yeah, we had to have somebody up there. It just was interesting. There are a lot of Stephen congregations in Albuquerque. We also didn't know we have sister congregations now. So it's just an interesting little nugget of a secret sometimes doesn't get out. But what I would say is the first thing is have a chat with a lay leader or a pastor in your church or your group, whoever your group is, and to say, hey, I heard about this on North Country Now or North Country Matters, and so I kind of want to find out about this. They might have heard something. There's a lot of interfaith pastoral meetings and things. They may have heard about it. Also, StephenMinistries.org is the home website, home base. They are full of information and contact, their phone number, their email. You can email them. They are a phenomenal group. They're about 40 employees, which to me seems, when you're operating around the world, 40 doesn't seem enough.
Right.
But so you can contact them through their website or by phone. They're very, very helpful. They will even look to find if you have someplace in your area that might have one that you can look at and model. So your church might be interested in, oh gosh, the church across town has one. We could go talk to them and see about that. So those are two really good
And that's
resources.
actually what you found out yesterday when you called Stephen Ministries to see if there was anything in northern New York. What did you find out?
It turns out Trinity Episcopal Church right here in Potsdam has a very active Stephen Ministries program. And I spoke with one of the people that kind of is one of their lay leaders that works with this, and they don't have, this is not something where I would recommend anyone calling that church and saying, I need a caregiver. They could do it because we as caregivers in a program go outside our church, we go to schools, we go to our neighbors, we can if they have the resources. But really, if you wanted to ask them to model, there's something right here, very close to you, that, and they're actually having a training class coming up this spring. I found that out too.
So this is another one of those little hidden nuggets in the North Country that, you know, I had never heard of the program until you and I started chatting, and then to find out there's one right here locally, and there may well be others. You know,
I think
once you get into
are.
it. So.
There's a little over 300 in New York State, and so I think that there could easily be another, and they would certainly know. The fun thing is once you get into the Stephen Ministry sort of link, you can find out where everybody is, and you can help each other too.
Right.
So I would love our church, as soon as we're in the current process of training our first set of ministers, I would love for us to be able to contact other churches in our area and say, hey,
mentor them.
Exactly, that would be great.
Well, thank you for coming in. It's been a fascinating conversation. It's not something I ever thought about before we started to talk, and yet the more you get into it, the more interesting it is, and the more needed it is, because one thing that we do know is that we need to take care of ourselves, we need to take care of our families, we need to take care of our communities, we need to take care of everybody. And this is an opportunity to have fabulous training and to really address people's needs one-on-one. Not as big groups of people, but just take care of your neighbor, take care of your friend, take care of each other. And we can always use more of that in the North Country.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share it so that it doesn't stay a nugget of something hidden behind a wall.
Thank you for being able to do it this trip.
Yeah.
Because we missed out on this last trip.
Definitely.
So our time is up, and thank you. These conversations have been a production of North Country Matters, which are filmed here in the Potsdam Public Library in the Fred Cleveland Computer Center. The show is a civic collaboration between the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women and the League of Women Voters of St. Lawrence County and the Potsdam Public Library. Until next time, remember, our North Country matters. Thanks.
Thanks. That was good. Thank you so much.
Conversation.